So welcome everyone to another regenerative finance lab in the design school for regenerating Earth. Today, we are going to be talking about a narrative strategy for the Earth Regeneration Fund. And as I was saying before we started the recording, I feel like we could make history if we actually get a diversity of storytellers to follow this strategy. And what you're going to see is that today I'm going to share part of my history as a frame analyst from my days of working with George Lakoff, and then the 8 years that I worked with an organization called The Rules, where we were hacking political discourse and helping social movements around the world to engage in narrative strategies for social change and how to deconstruct the way that people understand the world, especially when the understanding was constructed by intentional misinformation and intentional propaganda. And how do we create a different way of creating stories? Notice that we don't just create a different story, we create a different way of creating stories. And so what I want to emphasize is that we are in a moment where if we do what I'm going to outline today, we actually could, like at a big scale, we could create a tipping point in the trajectory of humanity. At a more modest scale, we could appease a lot of the suffering people are feeling as they're watching the United States destroy itself by a technocratic global cabal, which will have destabilizing consequences across the planet, which already is, but will have a lot more in the weeks and months ahead. And it's not as simple as who is the president of the United States. It's much, much more complex what is happening. But the important thing here is that we need a way of telling stories that brings us together. And if we just think at the level of the regenerative movement and go back to, I think it was around 2008 or 2007 when Paul Hawken wrote the book Blessed Unrest. Some of you are old enough to remember this. Blessed Unrest, where he actually went back and asked how many civil society organizations are working on sustainability in some way, and he counted 1 million. 1 million nonprofit organizations registered in different parts of the world that were working on sustainability in some way. So if you think of the regenerative movement today, it probably includes 1 billion people directly. It's so big and so diverse. If you think about how many permaculture projects there are in the world, how many eco-villages, how many community schools or alternative education models, how many people are working on their watersheds, conservation work, biodiversity, you could just make a huge list. And you would find that it's overwhelming, it's profoundly complex, and it is not coherent to itself. And I'm going to argue today that the way to make it coherent to itself is actually the secret ingredient of bioregional organizing, which is that living systems are already organized in landscape systems, and the Earth organizes us, self-organizing complexity, and that we can lean into that self-organizing complexity to tell stories. And those stories will create human organizing that is concordant with, that is aligned in shape and pattern and relationship with those natural ecological processes. And if we do that, this could have a catalytic and transformative effect at a planetary scale. So if that's not enough expectation setting for us, I think you'll see why when I share. And I want to emphasize this one other thing before I start the presentation part, which is my goal today is to make this strategy understandable. My goal is not to give you the comprehensive picture of how it all works. I want to give you the understanding of how it is actionable, so it's understandable by a large number of people. Something Penny said to me a few minutes before we started the call was, what's so powerful about this is everyone can do it. Anyone can do it. You don't need a university degree. You don't need special knowledge and skills. Everyone can do this, and this is so, so important. So what I'm going to do today is show us a logic to a strategy that can give rise to many different stories, but all of the stories move us in the same direction. That's the idea here. And this is one of those moments where if we do this, we can, and I'll just give one really specific example from what happened last week. In the United States, the Trump administration decided to furlough almost all of the employees of USAID, which distributes about $30 billion in international aid around the world. Now, there are lots of problems with international aid and international development, but that money directly supports what, 100,000, 200,000 nonprofit organizations who are now in crisis and who are going to go and look to the foundations in the philanthropic world to try and find money, which could actually break the philanthropic world because there's so much interdependence. So if we have a way for people who have financial resources to know how to create flow instead of getting gummed up and paralyzed, this is the kind of difference we're talking about, and it's planetary in scale. So that's just one example. There are lots of breakdown processes happening now, but the international development sector is a good example of a space that touches so many of our lives directly and indirectly. And we have no idea what the consequences will be of shutting down USAID because of the interdependencies. It's so damn complex. So we need a strategy that has the same sophistication and the same complexity, but that is understandable. Thus, the challenge of the storyteller today is to tell you that story. All right, so I've totally been like just, sucking in the excitement and anticipation. Let's go ahead and get started with the presentation. So here we go. Today, what I want to do is, here we go. No, that's not what I want to do. I want to do this, and then we'll get started. So today we're going to talk about a narrative strategy for the Earth Regeneration Fund. And the key thing that I want to emphasize here is that the old world is dying. Collapse is not only imminent, it's already been happening, but it's just jumped up a notch. There's been a quantum leap in how the old world is dying. And that means that a lot of people all over the world are doing two things that are not helpful. Well, we'll get to those in a moment, because a lot of us, everyone on this call, know that a new world wants to be born. And we need to help that new world to be born. But there are two things that people are doing that get in the way of that. One of them is they're falling back to old paradigms. There are lots of people that are falling back to partisan politics, to nation states, to, I don't know, to central banks, to NGOs, to foundations, to communism, socialism, capitalism, to isms, to all kinds of things. They're falling back to old paradigms when we need to create something new. And there are a lot of people that are in reactionary fear and paralysis. And earlier this week, as I was preparing for today's presentation, I went back and read Dana Meadows' essay on leverage points for changing a complex system. And she said that the most powerful leverage point, the most powerful way to intervene and change a complex system is to transcend paradigms, to actually look beyond paradigms. And what I want to do is invite everyone who is able to transcend paradigms to be the bridge between the old world that's dying and the new world that's being born. And as we transcend the paradigms of the old and invent the new, we'll be able to seed new stories into being. And we really need to be able to seed these new stories into being. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about is how bioregional Earth is a dynamic system attractor. We regenerate the Earth by becoming bioregional all over the planet, and we need to build a planetary network of bioregional funding ecosystems by sharing the stories about how people are doing it all over the world. And that part of the way we're going to do this is by living into the design pathway for regenerating Earth, which is the structural way of understanding how this logic works. But we do it through place-based organizing, which is a big piece of what we're doing in our learning journey in the design school, how to organize your bioregion, that starts in March. And you'll see how that works as part of the strategy. So what is this old world that's dying? Let's be sure we have a shared understanding of what we're moving away from. The old world that is dying is based on the illusion of separation. Men are separate from women, humans are not part of nature, etc. There are a whole bunch of illusions of separation. The economy is separate from the financial sector. Stupidity. There's so much stupidity in our policymaking. So the illusion of separation is part of the dying world. Nation states, like continents, can be divided by political boundaries created by rich men. Stupid. The old world is based in extraction and domination. It's a colonial world. Its guiding metaphor comes from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the metaphor of the clockwork universe that treats everything like a machine. This is the age of empires that began with the end of the last ice age, with the invention of agriculture, the creation of city-states, empires, and civilizations. And the age of empires is coming to an end because it needed a warm, stable climate and stable food systems from the Holocene. The Holocene is over. Also, it's globalized and without context. It decontextualizes all relationships and makes them everywhere and nowhere so that you cannot see who is raping whom and who is robbing whom as the elites accumulate their wealth and power. And it's also based on the idea and the belief that the universe is dead, that the earth and nature are just resources to be extracted and used, which is an absolutely devastating assumption. So the new world that wants to be born addresses all of these. It's grounded not in an illusion, it's grounded in the reality of interdependence. Think quantum mechanics and quantum field theory. Think ecology, think systems. It's grounded in the reality that everything is connected with everything else. Its focus is on regeneration and harmony, which is restoring health and well-being to living systems. Its guiding metaphor is an ecological world, a world of living beings, living subjects relating to each other in ecological health and harmony. And it's not the age of empires, it's the age of bioregions. It's the age of holistic living systems, organized as parts of the earth. And instead of being globalized and without context, it's translocal, which means it's multiple places in parallel, like a network. It's networked and it's contextual. The context really matters in every place. Each place is unique, but we need networks of places. And instead of being in a dead universe, we're in a living universe. And we need to organize our new world around the fact that we are part of a living planet and that we have a part to play in restoring the health and well-being of the entire biosphere, cryosphere, lithosphere, the hydrosphere, all of the subsystems of the dynamic Earth, which are all a living planet. Gaia hypothesis is true. Pachamama is the Earth. The Great Spirit is the living capacity of the universe expressed through our planet. Our living planet is what organizes us in this new world we're trying to create. And that's where we come to the Earth Regeneration Fund, which was born in September of last year as a network of bioregional funding ecosystems at different stages of development. We started with these 6. There are many more that need to be a part of this, and our work today is to expand this narrative and make it much more diverse and pluralistic through a narrative strategy. The key insight of the Earth Regeneration Fund is that each place that we're building a funding ecosystem, there are stories. There are stories of regeneration happening all across Cascadia. There are stories of regeneration happening across the high plains around the Ocalala Aquifer. There are stories of regeneration happening in the northern Andes and in Barichara, Colombia, and so on. Every one of these places, these bioregions, is a collection of relationships and stories that are coming together to tell the story of regenerating the Earth through collaborative storytelling. Something that we've begun to do, and that we have a lot of work to do in the future. So, what is a narrative strategy and how is it different from a story? This is like the really simple version. See, a narrative strategy is not a story. It's a way of creating many stories, lots of stories that achieve shared goals. Like if we want many different stories to be able to share the goal of bringing humans back into harmony with the rest of the Earth, then we would need a strategy that brings all those stories into harmony with each other. A narrative strategy is a way of creating many stories that achieve shared goals. It's sort of like getting on the same page about how to create social change in the world. And I want to show you a way that we can all get on the same page through a shared strategy for the rest of this year and beyond. To do that, I need to make a point that I learned from my studies in cognitive science and in frame semantics, which is that there are hidden structures and those structures matter. For example, if you look at these 2 circles and imagine that each of them is a sphere, From the outside, they look exactly the same, but one of them might actually be a living organism with all of the autopoietic and regenerative processes that constitute life, whereas the other one could be a set of gears and batteries and be a dead machine, and you can't tell without looking at the structures inside. So we have to look at the structure that gives rise to the dynamics to see how those structures give rise to the dynamics we need. And so one way of thinking about this is that there are hidden structures in the synaptic networks of the nervous system in your brain that gives you consciousness, that gives your body the ability to think, feel, dream, and act. And those hidden structures really matter. So we need to look at the hidden structures of our stories to see how they can help us in what we're going to do now. So human language is structured as stories, but those stories are connected to our bodies and our brains and our social and ecological environments. So those structures that are largely hidden to our conscious awareness are what we have to leverage in our storytelling. We have to leverage the structure of a watershed. We have to leverage the structure of a pro-social group collaborating together. We have to leverage the structure of the stories that bring humans together with each other and with the rest of the life place where they're doing their work. And those structures are the way that we discover our strategy. So a little context for why we need to do this now. Literally, day by day, the United States is destroying itself. A technocratic, billionaire, plutocratic cabal has completely dismantled and destroyed the last remnants of democracy in the United States, and they're actively hoarding the last of the wealth they can take before the United States collapses on itself. Because those of you living in the United States, like I did for a long time, will know that it's one of the most unequal places with the lowest trust in institutions, with incredible corruption at all levels of its government. It's already nearly dead. And the plutocrats are taking the last, they're salvaging the parts. I like to think of it like the car is already broken down and they're stealing the hubcaps. That's what they're doing right now with the last part of the United States. But honestly, it's not just the United States. All of our nation states are failing to deal with the complexity of our challenges today. Nation states are failing all around us. Just look at the rise of fascism in Europe, and we could pick many other examples. But nation states are failing us, and actually a transnational set of entities already dominate the world. This is the multinational corporations. This is the technocratic elite. This is the military-industrial complex. This is the systemic planetary-wide infrastructure of technological and financial totalitarianism. This is the way that free trade enclaves are used to rape and pillage and steal resources from intentionally impoverished people all over the world to create a billionaire class of technocratic elites and the global surveillance state that they were testing out with the COVID pandemic and what they're using now with weaponized artificial intelligence and propaganda and social media algorithms to control our lives today. This transnational system is real and prevalent, but the global system is an ecological overshoot. And what this means is that all of this is going to end. Because unsustainable literally means it can't go on. That technocratic, plutocratic, globalized totalitarian system, as scary as it is, absolutely depends on fossil fuels to continue to exist. And fossil fuels are not renewable resources. They will run out, or extreme climate change events will just break the global supply chains. Either way, the system is dying and it's going to collapse. And the future will be bioregional, whether we do it intentionally or not. We need to organize ourselves as local regenerative economies, and we need to be the countervailing winds, the alternative current pulling us away from that totalitarian surveillance state for the super rich. Everyone on Earth can participate in this, aside from that 0.001% who likes the system the way that it is. The rest of us can align against it, like the school of fish that can make themselves look big and be confusing to a shark. So this is the basic pattern that we need to enact. As the system breaks down, we need to weave a pattern of place-based efforts. Like I already said before, there are millions of place-based efforts already happening around the world. We need to weave them into tapestries. How do we do that? By helping to build bioregional organizing teams, local teams that can then go out and work with local stakeholder groups and create tapestries of action for their watersheds, for their food sheds, for their local economies, for their bioregional frameworks. And then we need to flow funding to those bioregional teams to then flow them forward into the local regenerative projects and initiatives in the territories. And as we do that, we build coherence across a network of bioregions. That's what this gives rise to, because we're helping to build funding, governance, and education ecosystems in every place that a bioregional team is organizing with local activities. And we build coherence across a network of bioregions by having multiple bioregions learning to do that at the same time. And then we form a planetary tapestry of these bioregional efforts to regenerate the entire Earth as the planetary system collapses and dies, and as we compost as much of it as we can to give birth to the regenerative economies that replace this rapacious colonial imperial system. Are you with me? This is why our narrative strategy is now, and why it could spread like wildfire, like Occupy Wall Street did a little bit more than 10 years ago. So we can look at it like this. Here we are in 2025, and a couple weeks ago in the greater Takaranto bioregion, we had an immersion to help catalyze the bioregional funding ecosystem there, led by the Legacy Project with Brian Pupa and Susan Bosak. Penny and I went there to help them do it. And in about a week, we have our Barichara immersion in the design school, where about 35 people are coming from different parts of the world to experience bioregional regeneration in Barichara. But then starting in March for 6 months, we have a learning journey, how to organize your bioregion, which creates structural support for a 6-month period of time for the members of the design school to create their own design immersions, which means to do local organizing of local events to begin creating bioregional organizing teams and bioregional organizing frameworks in a large diversity of places around the world connected with the learning journey. But that's just in the design school. There are other things happening. We're now actively partnering with R3.0. They have a conference in September on bioregional regeneration, and they just put out the invitation yesterday to invite participants in that conference to host local bioregional confluences, which is place-based gatherings for people to talk about bioregional regeneration in person while attending the dialogues that take place between January and September in the build-up to the R3.0 conference, and then during the R3.0 conference itself. The confluences were first prototyped by Neil Davidson and Ann Billen of And Now What around collapse acceptance and collapse resilience as part of R3.0's conference last year. And so that means that there will be place-based organizing in the design school with design immersions, and there will be place-based organizing around bioregional confluences in R3.0. And the longer-term vision over the next 2 to 3 years is for these confluences to move toward continental and planetary bioregional congresses, which means to organize fractally, multi-place up to continent, up to planet. And then also the Global Earth Repair Foundation, which has an action plan for regenerating the Earth through ecosystem restoration. We're now talking about hosting local action plans for bioregions. The first one that's scheduled is in May. Dee Dee Pershaus is organizing the creation of an Earth Repair Action Plan, which is a way of saying, what is your bioregional regeneration of ecosystems for the bioregion you live in? She lives in Vermont, so it's going to be connected to the Forest of the Northeast. But through Global Earth Repair, we're going to gather experts in ecosystem restoration, like the kind of people that are at the Eco Restoration Alliance, who know everything you need to know about watershed restoration, the restoration of hydrological cycles, and so on at large scales, to create ecosystem restoration action plans for bioregions that are place-based organizing activities. And now you start to see, just with these examples, there are a lot more I could give, that we can start to weave among stories, gatherings, learning processes, and place-based efforts with our shared strategy. So just with these 3 activities of the design school, R3.0, and Global Earth Repair, you see the pattern and the logic of having a way of mobilizing resources and storytelling into place-based efforts. This applies to a lot more than these three examples, but the three examples start to show you the possibilities. So, what we need to make this work is in two parts. One is we need planetary frameworks. We need a way that bioregions see that in my bioregion, I'm part of something bigger, and that something that's bigger is planetary scale. I'm going to give you three examples. There are more, but I'll give you three. One example is the 1,000 Landscapes for a Billion People project, which is led by eco-agriculture partners. They partner with Ashoka, with Common Land Foundation, with many other groups. But the basic idea is this. They identified, through the leadership of Sarah Scher, who's the founder of Eco-Agriculture Partners, they identified 1,000 landscapes that are at least 100,000 hectares in size, that if you were to regenerate these 1,000 landscapes, you would create a tipping point in ecosystem restoration across the planet, which would have planetary benefits for the Earth's climate. So it's a planetary framework of integrated landscape management at large scales. Pretty cool, huh? Well, what if that was to come together with what's outlined in my book, which is the Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth, which is this building a tapestry of bioregions, creating a planetary network of bioregional regeneration and regenerating the Earth through collaboration and learning exchanges, where each bioregion has a bioregional learning center, has a funding and governance ecosystem, does integrated landscape management, and so on. The 1,000 Landscapes for a Billion People blends beautifully with the idea of a planetary network of bioregions. And then put that together with the Global Earth Repair Action Plan, which is to ask questions like, how many millions of hectares of wetlands do we need to restore around the world? How do we restore ecological corridors across the planet through ecosystem restoration? Global Earth Repair has been building a planetary action plan of ecosystem repair that is a planetary framework. So these are just three. There are more, but see how these planetary frameworks don't tell us how to do it. So that's where we need the other half of our strategy, which is place-based efforts. We need place-based efforts that live out and manifest the planetary frameworks. I'm going to give you a few examples. There are a lot more than I'm going to give. One is the creation of bioregional organizing teams, like we do here in the design school, like they're doing in the BioFi Project's community of practice, like they're doing in the bioregional weaving labs in Europe. See, there are bioregional organizing teams. That's a way of forming place-based efforts. But then you also have integrated landscape management, like Common Land Foundation does, like Eco-Agriculture Partners does, like 1,000 Landscapes for a Billion People does, to create holistic landscape approaches, to regenerate watersheds, to create food sheds, to create fiber sheds, and so on, to create regenerative economies through holistic landscape management. Then there's the work of restoring water cycles, reversing desertification, like we're doing in Barichara, Colombia, through watershed restoration and reforestation, or like they're doing in India through the Flow Project, with a collaboration among Indian farmers in the northwestern parts of India and the Indian desert, the restoration of water cycles. Another is through the Global Eco-Village Alliance, the network of eco-villages around the world. Or what about the Transition Town Network, which has thousands of place-based efforts? Many of them are sort of languishing at the moment because they need an infusion of funding and inspiration. But the Transition Network spans the globe. And then what about the Ecoversity Alliance, where there are already 70 or 80 places where people are creating alternative models of learning ecosystems based on ecological and cultural context, which means they're inherently bioregional already. So the Ecoversity Alliance is another network of place-based initiatives. And then you've got all of the permaculture convergences all over the world. There's a New England permaculture convergence. There's the Northwest permaculture convergence. Those are both in the US. But if you go to someplace like Australia or New Zealand or Eastern Africa, you'll find networks of permaculture practitioners that gather in convergences. Usually they gather quarterly or annually. How could those permaculture convergences become place-based efforts for manifesting the planetary frameworks? Or what about the ecosystem restoration camps, which evolved into the ecosystem restoration communities, which is a network of place-based networks and activities all over the world? And there are lots of other initiatives. So the idea here is this: we need planetary frameworks that make it coherent what we're doing locally. And we need a huge and splendid diversity of local place-based efforts that are organizing into holistic landscapes and bioregions to implement and manifest the planetary frameworks. So how do we do that? Drum roll, please. The narrative strategy in 4 parts. It looks like this. I want it to be really easy to understand. Part 1, support local organizing teams to create bioregional frameworks. That is, that we need a way of helping people to organize themselves into holistic landscapes and to cultural identities for living in the life stories of their place. This is what Regenesis Group does with Story of Place. This is what we're doing in the design school and what other people are doing. We need to support local teams to not just do ecosystem restoration or not just do permaculture. We need them to build bioregional frameworks with an organizing team, and we got to get that organizing team funded. So that means the second thing is we need to create flow funding that supports the organizing teams and then gives them extra money to pass on into a tapestry of local efforts. Notice the word tapestry. This means the local efforts are not isolated or fragmented. They're woven together through the bioregional frameworks. And flow funding means you want the financial resources to flow. You want to build trust with people. You want those who have expertise to decide where the money goes. You don't want a lot of bureaucracy. If money arrives to the bioregion, the bioregional organizing team convenes a process to create a collaborative budget, distributes the money to the local actors. The local actors use the money to flow the money into local action, and regenerative economies get a lifeblood through flow funding. So we need to say, we need money that flows based on trust to the people on the ground, held through the organizing frameworks of bioregional organizing. When we do that, we can then do the next powerful thing, which is tell the stories about what's happening. Part of the way you mobilize funding is the organizing team discovers stories. They start to tell stories. Those stories attract financial resources. Those financial resources cause things to happen. As those things happen, you tell the stories about the things that have happened. And in this way, millions of regenerative stories come into being all over the world. And as we tell these stories, we weave the stories into the planetary frameworks. We say, look, there are already 35 of the 1,000 landscapes. Oh, number 36 just joined. Oh, look, there is an action plan for global earth repair that just emerged in Uganda. You see, the local stories are connected to the planetary frameworks. This is critical because the narrative strategy is to support local organizing to create bioregional frameworks, flow financial resources to that organizing team and through them to regenerative initiatives, tell stories about what's happening, and connect those stories to planetary frameworks, to Earth regeneration as a whole. If we do these 4 parts, what happens? Well, the Earth Regeneration Fund, which is the entire ecosystem of these stories, it's a web of relationships and powerful stories, and the value flows among them. And so if you have like this 4 different bioregional contexts, then you have 4 contexts of relationships within each bioregion. You have the relationships between the bioregions. You have stories happening at multiple levels, and you have lots of value flowing between them. And all of that is the Earth Regeneration Fund. It's a storytelling platform that moves financial resources to, through, from, and with all of these relationships through the stories. It's about the stories. So it looks like this. The Earth Regeneration is a tapestry of stories. It's not just a pool of money. It's a tapestry of stories. Those stories enable us to create bioregional funding pools. We can fund financial resources into bioregional frameworks. I'll give a couple examples of things that I'm fundraising for right now. Bioregional Flow Fund starter kits, which we're doing with Kinship Earth. An article came out about this on Wednesday morning. to basically provide seed funding for bioregional organizing teams to practice flow funding and to set up a bioregional flow fund. The design school is hosting a learning journey, and we're encouraging our members to offer immersions, local place-based organizing. Our membership dues, the members of the school give $5 a month into the design school, has allowed us to pool money to provide financial support to the design school members to support their immersions. But what if we raise more money in the design school to give to those members of the learning journey to have local events? We can give seed funding for local organizing. And then bioregional conferences. What if we raise money for R3.0 for them to have a larger pool of money for the people that are coming to their dialogues and conference to have financial support to host local confluences? And what if we raise money for Global Earth Repair Foundation to be able to provide local groups to organize and create Earth repair action plans, to actually convene the scientists and the permaculture practitioners and the policy experts and so on of the place to create Earth repair action plans? Well, if we could fund money in these different ways, pool it in this way, then we have financial scaffolding for multi-location or translocal organizing. But as I mentioned earlier, we also have educational scaffolding. We have organizing scaffolding through the learning journey, through Global Earth Repair, through R3.0 building up to their conference. We have scaffolding. By the way, the BioFi project has a BioFi cultivator, which is scaffolding for organizing people who could receive these funds, who could create these funds, who could also flow their stories into the Earth Regeneration Fund's ecosystem. And now you see the real power of the narrative strategy. The narrative strategy is to support bioregional organizing to create bioregional frameworks, create flow funding that flows into local initiatives, have those local initiatives create stories, and those stories become woven into planetary frameworks. And we do this by having money come to the Earth Regeneration Fund to create bioregional funding pools. Those bioregional funding pools support all of that work. They support the place-based organizers to give funding to local initiatives to tell stories in a virtuous circle, that becomes a spiral of growth. This is a way of growing the Earth Regeneration Fund, growing the bioregional funding pools, growing the diversity of place-based efforts. And that's why this narrative strategy is so powerful in this moment. And so the thing about this is that you can enter this story, like if you were a donor or an impact investor, you can enter this story through many doors. Each of it has its own focus and supports, and I'll give you a few right now. If you wanted to donate money to the Kinship Earth Flow Fund for the Bioregional Flow Fund Starter Kit, what that means is if you wanted to give money to help Kinship Earth, for them to work with bioregional organizing teams and then help set up bioregional flow funds, go to this QR code and donate money to Kinship Earth. You could do it right now. There's the link. If you wanted to support Global Earth Repair and their Global Earth Repair Convergence, as well as the creation of action plans for bioregional regeneration, you could go to their website through this QR code and donate money to them right now. Anyone can do this. And if you wanted to support the design school immersions, we actually have a way of donating money, but just by inviting people to become members adds $5 a month through membership dues. So if you invite people to become design school members, you increase the pool of money that we can invest in design immersions with our participants during the learning journey. But then also, you could give into the Planetary pool and watch it flow to bioregions all over the world by donating through this link directly to the Earth Regeneration Fund. So you see how all of this would be really confusing? It's like, is Joe asking a potential donor to donate to a bunch of things? No, I'm asking any potential donor to donate to whatever they most resonate with, because all of these are in an ecosystem of collaboration and they each have their own focus. And if you give money into the Earth Regeneration Fund right now, where there's not very much money there, you may not see outcomes. But if you contributed to Kinship Earth, you might help set up the first bioregional flow fund, which has a much smaller activation energy. right? Or if you just invite someone to become a design school member, they are giving $5 a month continually into a fund that's a tiny crowdsourcing approach, but that accumulates resources to support the ecosystem over time. And you see that all of these are related through the narrative strategy. Without a narrative strategy, it's confusing. With the narrative strategy, they all are mutually supporting. And this is just a way of seeing how we can build this narrative strategy to flow financial resources to any and all of these efforts that are going to need a lot of help in the months ahead. So this is a different way of telling stories. It's a different way of fundraising. It's a different way of organizing. And it's actually, the stories are not just told, the stories are lived out in many places at the same time. And this is literally and concretely how we live into the story of a bioregional Earth, how we become Earth regenerators, how we gather together and create the cultural, learning, financial systems, the systems of governance and funding and education that enable us to do this work. And so that's the presentation that I wanted to give to you today for us to be able to talk about. The narrative strategy is a way of flowing financial resources into a splendid diversity of place-based organizing, but with frameworks of collaboration that bring them into coherence with each other. And if we do this as the nation states fail, we will build the parallel system. We will build it through our diverse actions, which is why, like I said at the beginning, if we chose to live out this narrative strategy, you can tell whatever story you want locally, whatever story that relates to your project and your effort, but tell it in a way that supports mobilizing funding into bioregional organizing and into coherence with planetary frameworks. And if you do that, which is usually a small shift in what you're doing already, then things like Gitcoin and their climate network of supporting climate projects, which is sort of a mess of beautiful little projects, but if they were supporting planetary frameworks, they would make more sense, right? And the same could be, so the Web3 space has its own, there's a whole conversation about the 1,000 different ways we can live out this strategy. So what I want to do now is invite some conversation. How do we do this? What are you already doing that's part of this? Does this make sense to you? Do you have questions? Do you want to poke holes in the logic and challenge it? Let's have a conversation about it. Because I feel like the time is yesterday for us to do this. And there's just really no more time to waste. So I'd love to open it up for questions, for comments, for ideas, for celebration, for grieving, for all of it, any of it. So if you'd like to share, just raise your hand and we can have a discussion. And maybe while we're waiting for the hand raising, see, Nate's got something to share. I know Penny was thinking she might have some things to share. I don't know if she does. But Nate, we'll start with you. Come on in.
Great. Just a few words. I want to use the word gamification. At a hyper-local level, to weave people who aren't going to get this picture at all into opportunity moments, pivot points between. So we had a local landscaping firm that was being a bad neighbor, but they were actually collecting lots and lots of wood from one of the hurricanes that came through here a few years back. And they were at the juncture of three rivers, one of which needed to be daylit. The land could have become part of the local land trust and become kind of a living future museum for bioregional regeneration. And I stepped in and had a conversation with the alderperson, the business owner, a few people, and they weren't ready. This was maybe 8 years ago. They weren't ready. But if that situation were gamified, then without these people knowing the kind of narrative structure that you're describing here, which is beautiful, they would be starting to, there'd be a choice point. between the vision that something like the vision I had, which would be find a different piece of land for that business that was already operating bioregionally without intending to. Create the business ecosystem in which that wood became part of the local life web as opposed to the supply chains that we were depending on. Where the land that was there becomes the highest and best use, which is an awareness of the life of the watershed. And all these things kind of function stack. But no, they just chose to say, oh, name call and feel like nobody's listening to me and nobody's hearing my side of the story, and it just kind of devolved into whatever. So to gamify that, even for people who weren't involved, but like students who are in a business school, and say, what would you do in this situation, and give them a chance to play that out. And then the game kind of morphs into a metabolic system to metabolize the information within the frameworks that we're describing here. And so like researching, what can I do with this situation? Oh, well, there's this guy who knows how to do this and that and the other thing. So it can start to grow in that direction. It moves, it's not a parallel game. A game is a low friction environment that's parallel to a universe one way or another. And if that's less, if it's not quite parallel, then there's there's the up leveling in the game is actually moving into the real world.
Well,
So you start with low friction and then, so that's that.
I just think this is beautiful. And I want to emphasize a point that is,
oh, you froze, Joe. Yeah, go ahead.
Something that's implicit in what you said, which is that the game designer, in this case, that's the storyteller, does not need to make public to their audience how the storytelling strategy works. They just need to understand the storytelling strategy. And so I was like, the target audience of the talk I just gave is for the storytellers. Telling the story in alignment with the strategy does not require that the strategy is made explicit in the telling of the story. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Depends on what the context is. But like gamification is creating storytelling contexts. So I think it's a beautiful example. Oh,
Bring you back, Penny.
Here I'm back. Am I back? Am I back, Penny, or no? Okay. Yeah, our connection's getting a little unstable here.
You're back. The last word was gamification.
He was. There, now you're back, hopefully. Oh, darn. He's frozen again.
Our connection is bad. Yeah, Penny, why don't you leave so we have less bandwidth being used? And then I'm just going to say, it's important for the storytellers to know the strategy rather than you tell the story. People still, it's still blocking? Well, you wouldn't be able to tell because you're also blocked too. Okay. I think I will go on to Jan since I am the unstable internet connection. Jan, over to you. Yeah, but it's not working. John, are you there? Looks like I lost everyone. So what I need to do is turn on my hotspot and connect that way. Hey everyone,
and then he was going to say something more about gamification.
Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'm moving outside where I have better phone signal. And then, Jan, I was trying to go to you, but then I dropped me as I was trying to connect to you. So I'll go to Jan and then to Robert. And so Jan, over to you.
Cool. I actually think that I have a point on the gamification that I very much agree with, but I wanted to connect this to my personal story with this group and the movement and everything, and how happy I feel in this moment, sort of to see everything really, the large picture coming together that we've been talking about for years. And for me, this was a very personal thing in a few years ago, in a time of big depression, dealing with understanding the dying world, right? And coming to terms with that. And then discovering through crypto and refi, discovering the regenerative community. And then once I saw just how many thousands and thousands of projects I discovered through this, that we're all doing the little things all over the place, was something that really changed my trajectory and having an outlook, right? Or something, and weaving these people together. And so one of the first things after I came to Barichara back then was sort of a little app to give to the stewards of stewards to put a pin on a map and say, I know 10, 15 projects in my area, and basically creating a registry. So this is, I'm only saying this because that is sort of the gamification that I was thinking about back then, and I think still has value, because we can't ask all these projects to come, hey, here's another app or another thing you need to sign up for, but we can be the white glove service to get them onto a map. And here we are back at the mapping exercises, right? But we can easily create a mechanism to do this through this network and the organizations you listed, as a very simple way to just collect the data and create the overview that we need. I think that's all. So thank you. I'm super happy. I'm all for it. I don't think I have much to add. It is all expressed in I'm a techie, so my first thing is, oh, let's make an app for that. No, there's so much more complexity here, and thank you for painting that picture.
Yeah, thank you, John. Lovely to hear and to see your evolution in the last few years. And then Robert, over to you. Welcome.
Hi, Joe. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. Thank you. So I just want to commend you for bringing forth a vision, a holistic vision of what can happen in the future, and it's a beautiful thing. I studied with a man called Bucky Fuller in '67, and he told me that you can't stop what's going on unless you have something that's better to show them how to do it. And this is what this movement's all about. And I partnered with Bill McDonough, who in the late '80s, and we understand that you have to show people how to do things. And you're doing what he did in terms of creating a philosophical grounding and a structure and a way of designing the future that people can really grok and understand and really get and really move towards. And I think that's so important, Joe. What you're doing here is really powerful and essential for where we are. The things I would mention that you might want to consider in the way in which you look at things. One is mystery. I didn't hear anything about mystery in your in the interconnectedness of all things. I'm also involved with Native American folks and helped sponsor the Cry of the Earth conference in 1992 and '93 in New York City at the UN, where we had 7 nations speak the prophecies, which is happening now, all of which are happening now. So it's a time for mystery to be incorporated. And the other thing is timing. Nina and Kenny, who started the Bioneers 35 years ago, really saw what you see, and try to hold the space of what you are doing now in the bioregioning area. They called it Bioneers back then, and that they did this network of places and place-based events that happened all over the world. That happened for a few years, but things come and go, and so you have to understand that your time. You have to. I think part of what the old world way that's dying has to take account of, and I'm a baby boomer and I'm dying, but I'm not yet. that you have to think about the timing. You have to be considerate and not push too hard. Don't push too hard. It's going to happen, but it's going to happen in the right time in the right way at the right time. And you remember that the people who have the power also have military power and financial power. It's not going to fall away so quickly. So just be concerned about that. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
I just want to honor and thank you for your history and your life and your devotion, which is so evident in what you've just shared. And you're causing me to think of another person who's very likely a shared friend, which is Dwayne Elgin. I'm guessing you know him if you know some of these other folks.
I know his name. I don't know him
Well, Dwayne
personally.
Elgin worked with Joseph Campbell back in the early 70s, and he was the lead author of a report to the U.S. Department of Education about how we need to reimagine the humanity as ecological. That was 55 years ago. Just saying yes to all of it, and
Absolutely.
the timing is the breakdown has to be far enough along. And so I'm completely with you. And hell yes,
Thank
the
you.
mystery. And a car is turning, so I'm loud. So I'm going to Claire. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited to see you just articulating it like this, because honestly, it's been something I couldn't have expressed it the way you have, but I've just known that if we don't support the local organizing teams, that work just couldn't happen. And just the way that it's starting to play out, all of the pieces need to be in place at the different scales. So that's exciting. So the thing that I guess we're seeing is that there are many people who are seeing bits and pieces of this, but are wanting to put together platforms where they're holding some of the stories. And some of it is actually, it feeds into old narratives. So it sort of takes what's emerging and yeah, I'm not going to name some of the places where we've been seeing some of that, but just sort of realizing that when powerful stories are being told, that it suddenly becomes the place that everybody wants to go and put their flag in the ground and claim and publish and own it. And I think there would be like a next level of starting to kind of just identify what does it look like when we're doing it in essentially right relationship with place-based living and what the earth needs, so that it starts to show where that's not happening, so that people can make that discernment. So anyway, I just wanted to raise that.
Thank you so much for that, Claire. It's super important. And then Andrea, over to you.
Yeah, just I feel very inspired and alive from this presentation and sort of all of the opportunities that it can afford to people. I feel like it's very timely as the Bow River bioregion is really like starting to pick up again. Like we have our next meeting on Tuesday. And I guess what I've also been reading a lot of stories and reading Hospicing Modernity and The Medicine Wheel for the Earth. And it's like really changing the way that I want to approach like research and engagement with the environment, and in a way that doesn't feel in alignment with the current industrial universities or research programs or funding and all of that. And like this sort of flow of funding, regenerative funding, could open up so many possibilities for like deep research and like I don't know, just completely changing the way that even like I see my life going. Like I want to get a job, I need money, I'm like blah blah blah, but I'm like, but if I can work in service to this and I can work in this way, like that would be way better. And like it's just been so inspiring, and like I'm working on my own uh storytelling and writing again. Like I'm a multidisciplinary artist and like creative, so just like yeah, the whole thing of weaving everything together is very alive in me right now. So I'm just thankful for these new horizons, I guess.
Mm. Oh, thank you, Andrea. I'm so glad we get to hang out in person in a week. To come into Body Chara with us. I just wanted to say how important it is what you said. The one thing, which is, I'm gonna have to go and look for work, but I'd rather be doing this. I want to be doing something that brings me aliveness. I don't want to be doing something pointless just to make money. You're among about, I don't know, 7.9 billion people who feel that way. That's the general sentiment of the world right now. And that's the power. If something was going to ignite this as a fire to get this idea to spread, it would be addressing that. To give people a purposeful way to express what's in their hearts in service to something they love. And that's what Robert was saying too. If there's something that can attract it from the place of mystery, that's the deep power of the storytellers. The storytellers will invite us into a story we didn't even know. Like Harry Potter is like in the minds of hundreds of millions of kids, but someone had to invent that. J.K. Rowling invented that in a coffee shop. And so like the power of creating stories. So we imagine something different. And there's so many examples. We all have our stories we love. But I just wanted to really emphasize that. And then I'm going to pass it over to Penny because that's why I had my hand raised. So we'll go to Penny next.
Thanks, Andrea. Um, so I wanted to I've been thinking about, so for each of us here, how do we,
Internet is muy bueno en la casa.
how do we think about, how do we tell a story that includes these elements? Like inviting each of us to think about it for ourselves. And for me, I think about turning these things that Joe presented into questions for ourselves. And when we're thinking about telling a story. So for example, how do I name, when I'm telling a story, the worldview shift that he's talking about from the worldview of separation of a dead universe to the worldview of a living universe, to an ecological planet that we're a part of. So how do we bring that into the story in whatever way we're telling? How can I talk about the globalized system that's breaking down? How do we talk about the technocratic AI world that is the globalized fascism that's starting to happen now? How do we name that and then name what's the new story that's wanting to be born out of that? Like what's being born away from that or into this new story, into this living universe that we're going to be basically remembering and reconnecting to. And then how is that new story being born? So those are the four elements Joe is naming. How do I talk about weaving patterns of place-based efforts, coming back to the local places and organizing in our life places? How do I tell the story of the weaving of those processes that are already happening, but the weaving of them together into this bioregional pattern? And then how do I talk about funds flowing to these efforts on the ground? What does that look like? There's examples. How do I talk about the examples of it happening, or how could it be happening? And then how do I talk about building coherence across the planetary efforts? Where is it happening? How is it happening? So how do I weave that into my story, and how do I weave in the tapestry of these projects is regenerating the whole planet. So it's like turning all of these things that Joe presented into questions for ourselves, and then tell a story. You do like a simple, see if you can weave in at least some of those into your stories. And that's how, if there's multiple of us doing this, we can all do that. And then this story is getting out in multiple voices in multiple ways and multiple mediums and so forth. So that's how I'm thinking of it more practically for myself. Okay, I'm gonna ask these questions of myself whenever I'm writing something on social media or anywhere.
Hola, ¿cómo estás? Yeah, I think the inquiry part of this, the open-endedness, the humility of it, the mystery of it is all really, really important. And just to rename something that Claire said earlier, which is that the people doing the organizing this work are currently the most or underappreciated people, but they're also some of the most important. But they're invisible because they're in the wrong story. Or rather, other people are telling the wrong story. With the right story, you see their importance. And so just wanted to name that as well. Now over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Joe and Penny, for leading this conversation. I just want to specifically respond to the question about as the old system breaks down, how do we weave the new story? And just a real practical example, I'm in Toronto, so Canada. We're getting threatened by all these tariffs from Trump. And it's really stimulated a huge conversation in Canada about buying Canadian, buying local, which I'm trying to harness through my networks of how do we start to organize our food system in locally in the GTB? Because forget about, Trump may or may not do any of these things. He probably will do some of them, but we need to prepare for the collapse. Like climate change is going to hurt all the food that we impact the food we're getting from California. There's going to storms, floods. It's all going to mess that up. So we need to be ready. So I think this is actually the collapse, as you say, is preparing us and forcing us to address a new reality. And I think it's really awakening people. So I'm trying to use that energy to organize people in my community to figure out how do we, starting with food is like, how do we make sure we have food to eat when all this goes bad? So thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to emphasize something that Andrew just role modeled, which is part of the way you tell this story, is reframe what is happening. Reframe the threat of tariffs against Canada as an opportunity to relocalize our food system. That's a good example of what we're talking about. So there'll be thousands of examples. That's a really good one. So thank you for that, Andrew. And now, Neil, over to you.
Firstly, Joe, thanks so much for bringing such a wonderful narrative to life here for us. A lot of resonance with the work that we've been doing for quite a long time, as you know. I'm part of And Now What with Anne, my partner who's sitting in the background here, and our friends David in Australia, plus also Equinox Collective that are running confluences. And I just wanted to pick up on part of what Robert Stang mentioned about power and what Penny mentioned also about how do we tell this story. But there's also a how do we adapt this story for whom we are talking with. And that is a critical element of the developmental journey and or the capability and maturity of everybody here in the school. It's no point in trying to talk up to somebody that doesn't respect you because of the language you're using and the nature of the way you're using that language, regardless of how passionate you are about it. And so we have to have different levels of narrative for different players in the system. And we have to be working out ways of speaking up the line to get the barriers to a lot of the work we're doing out of the way so that we can actually accelerate the rate at which we're doing the work. So there's a bottom-up, top-down type strategy. Some of this we've talked about in terms of a strategy for the systems leadership group, guild, and how do we bring that to ground. Part of that's in the confluencing process that we're trying to bring, which last year pushed collapse awareness and collapse acceptance. And in our courageous confluence that we intend to hold here in somewhere in Europe, probably the Netherlands or Belgium, how do we hold the right people in the room to be removing the barriers to a lot of the work we know needs to be done? And so I love the fact that you've given us now a beautiful framing, Joe. I intend to use that framing, and what we need now, I think, is some common hooks so that we're using the same sort of wording and connecting the meta frames that we've got and the on-the-ground strategies through the common wording that's in the middle. And you're, at the moment, I think, the spokesperson for this group. Unfortunately, I'm looking at myself on the screen at the moment, so I can't see whether anybody else is actually nodding or disagreeing or whatever. But to me, it's a lot of the how in the detail we actually do have distributed throughout the school already. It's now how do we capture that in a way that's going to be really moving the whole field forward, not just micro engagements forward. It's both and top down, bottom up, horizontal coherence and vertical alignment if we can get it. And that's what we're trying to do from our end at And Now What. So brilliant, mate. Well done.
Thank you, Neil. I want to just add that one of the great things about events and event structure. Anyone who's ever studied like Feynman diagrams or quantum mechanics, the event structure is the moment where an interaction occurs. And in a story, there's event structure as well. But one thing that we're creating through the design school and that R3.0 is doing with the Confluence is there going to be event moments every time any local group organizes that's in our network. So if Maria Ellen is organizing in France, there's an event moment. In a week in Barichara with our immersion, there's an event moment. And so part of this is for our storytellers to use the event moments as hooks. And then to do what you said, which is the storytellers to come together around shared strategy, which I think I see Megan's up next. And I now know from her storytelling circle that she's a storyteller, that there are other storytellers. Steve is a storyteller. Frank, they all got a whole line of people coming next to storytellers. That our storytellers can come together around exactly the kinds of strategies you're talking about. Shared language, shared wording, shared framing, and then diversified for different audiences and understanding the importance of that. So just to say yes to all of that, and that the local organizing creates a plurality of experimental opportunities to practice storytelling, which is why funding the stories that happen become the opportunities to tell the stories, to bring in the supports to help other stories to happen. And that's sort of the underlying dynamic of this. So thank you for that, Neil. And now,
excellent. Just one minor touch to that. The Indigenous storytelling in Australia, and it probably exists in all the other places as well, was common story with multiple levels of meaning. And the multiple levels of meaning were accessed by asking the right question, not by coming in with the right answer. And so the living the questions is so critical to this. And when little Jackie asks, what do I do with this one? You get referred to Uncle Bobby, because Uncle Bobby is the one that knows that next level. And so we need a process here which mutually respects the different levels at which we can each tell the story. So we have to recognize when to hand it down to somebody that's speaking to the kindergarten kids, and we know when to hand it up to somebody who's speaking to, the theologians. And I'm only using those as two examples of something we'd all know, but that's really critical. It's not just a one size fits all. Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Sorry, Megan.
Yes, please. I agree. Megan, over to you.
Yeah, very, very exciting and very cool. And it gives me like a really nice way of knowing where to focus my energy in this space because but anyway, yeah, one of the things, so I love that you brought, Neil, the living the questions, and one of the, and that the what you were bringing, Penny, all of the questions about like how to tell all of these stories and how to sort of signal, especially when people are so overwhelmed so much of the time and so kind of stuck in narratives of fear. And so that's one thing that kind of comes up in my mind immediately when it's sort of talking about how to tell the story of collapse, because it's also like how to tell the story, like the real heart-based stories that bring in the love and the inspiration that will actually make people want to get involved and step up and be inspired, and not kind of shut down through the sort of fear response that comes when we talk about all these things that are so real. But so it's like a real living question with me of kind of how to bring that element in to the extent it needs to be brought in. And then I was also just thinking of the sort of, to me, a little bit of a polarity on the the relational way of telling stories and narrative diversity that there's so many, like a million different ways to tell a story, that but then in a way that also builds coherence. So those are just the questions kind of living with me. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think it's so important for us to see that we need many, many ways of telling these stories. There's no one size fits all. Yeah. It's actually living in the new world, which is the world that is contextual and translocal. And so those ideas of the new story are also ways of telling the story.
And
So
one thing to
yeah.
add, one thing we also need is to see each other telling stories so that we get inspiration for how do we tell it in different ways and these. So somehow we need to be like making it visible to each other. We could do it in the design school. We can link to people's LinkedIn posts, for goodness sake, in the design school and say, go check this one out. Like Megan just told this story, and so that we can start to like resonate with each other in our storytelling.
Yeah, which is also really good grief management and healing, which we need to care for ourselves. So adding yes, and looking forward to seeing what we can do together, Megan, in this. I'm excited about it. And then over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Joe. Hugely inspiring as usual. I have to confess, I kind of felt this was the narrative strategy all along. Oh, so thank you for re-articulating it. But this is kind of what that's what I thought game we were in.
If you were ahead of the game, you're a fast learner.
I love the juxtaposition of the place-based efforts and the planetary frameworks. I think it would be really helpful if you could just elaborate a bit more, make it a little more concrete. What are the essential elements or characteristics of both a planetary framework and a bioregional framework? Because you talked about both frameworks. I suspect those are just, the bioregional framework network at a planetary level is the planetary framework. But yeah, can you just put some more meat on the bones there and just kind of elaborate the essential characteristics of planetary framework?
Yes, this is such a great question. It probably deserves its own webinar and discussion, but I'll give an outline of it for now. One thing about a planetary framework is that it needs to be unifying around things that are real at a planetary scale. So things like jet streams, things like ocean mixing processes, things like how evaporation in the ocean leads to snowpack in mountains. So there's an Earth systems part of this, which is understanding how the Earth already connects us and making it visible in the stories. And then another piece of it is the fact that very few groups of people or organizations are successful at holding a planetary narrative. Like basically people can tell a generic planetary narrative that's not very actionable, or they do actionable things and they fail to tell a planetary narrative. And the sweet spot of doing both is actually uncommon. We don't have, like, you can see like the banning of chlorofluorocarbons to restore the ozone layer is an example of a clear way of telling a story of how to do something that had a planetary unifying framework. And that's like, how many environmental success stories are there? Pretty much that one and no others. Like, it's so hard to have them. And so even when we look at how widespread permaculture practices, it's all over the world, but we don't tell it as a planetary narrative. Why not? And it's because it's not lived out and experienced in connection to an understandable planetary framework. So the idea that there need to be semantic frames, conceptual understandings of the planetary interdependence. So we have to have a sense of something, like I'll give an example of something I was talking with my partner here in Bardichar, Natalia Ortiz. We've been building the Northern Andes Regeneration Fund as a collaboration of 8 territories in Colombia. But in 2 weeks, we're meeting with all of the territorial foundations of Colombia, plus the hub organization for territorial foundations in Peru, to see if they would like to join the Northern Andes Regeneration Fund and expand us to Peru, which include the Sacred Valley and other very important organizing patterns. Well, notice just that move actually implies and moves our thinking of a story that's continental in scale. If you're talking about Peru and Colombia as the Northern Andes, you're already holding a South American understanding, because the Andes actually span the entire South American continent. And so this way of moving us to continent brings us into planetary thinking. And it's one of those little moves in the story. So we need semantic structures, narrative structures, ecological mechanisms that bring us to the planetary frameworks. So the 1,000 landscapes, if it's just a collection of 1,000 landscapes, it's not planetary. But it's 1,000 landscapes understood through a holistic ecosystem restoration understanding of hydrological cycles, then it's a planetary framework. So you see, like, I'm not giving you the whole picture. We need to unpack this more. But this is where something like transition
Yeah,
town.
what I'm getting now is
Quite
the combination of coherence. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No,
I'll
no,
let you
go
finish.
ahead. And there's a motorcycle in front of me, so I'll let you speak.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
it's
thanks. No, what I was getting was the combination of actionable and coherent. And that sweet spot you talk about is, you can have planetary stories that aren't actionable, and you can have actionable stories that don't bring planetary coherence. But bringing those two together is the essential characteristic of a planetary framework. Did I
and I'll
get that
just,
right?
yeah, I would say yes. And that the connection to what a properly understood bioregional framework is, which is how to create a whole systems understanding of your local place, which actually opens itself to coherence with the planet. And so it's not just that I'm doing a large scale watershed understanding, because if I'm doing it in a mechanistic mindset, I'm still not bringing in the deep ecology and the eco-spirituality that is core to the bioregional movement. And a lot of people like a lot of people are using bioregional thinking now. No, I should say they're using bioregional words, but they're not using bioregional thinking, because bioregional thinking is indigenous, is eco-spiritual, is deep ecology. But that's part of helping people learn what bioregionalism is. So bioregional frameworks include spirituality, include indigenous ways of thinking, and so forth. And so bioregional frameworks is a conversation for us to have. We need to elaborate what that means in the context of the storytelling. But those are two levels of example of what you're asking about, and much more to discuss. So thanks so much for bringing it in, Steve. Very astute as usual. And Victoria, over to you.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to give a quick example of when I talked with an educator who's working with school-age kids about nature education and told him what we were doing. He said, "That's so amazing, because now it links all the things from what we're doing here to all the way up." And that's really, really great. And when I talk to educators and teachers, to be able to say, whatever you're doing with the kids, nature-based, there are all these other levels at every grade that people can start understanding the children, as they grow up. And they got it immediately. They just got the conversation. They just right now don't have the tools. Oh, great.
Thank you, Victoria. We've experienced that in the GTB with the education work there and with our education work in Body Char. So I completely agree. And then over to Frank. Over to you, Frank.
It's all about meaning. It's all about meaning. Just, that's what the thing is that they're understanding, is that it creates meaning for kids that's relevant to their growth and development and hope.
Absolutely. Thank you, Victoria. Over to you, Frank.
Thanks. Thank you, Victoria. That's a great message. I just want to say thanks to everyone. It's great to see everyone. And jumping into this conversation, I wanted to offer a gift up. I put a link inside of the chat, which is a story that I helped weave together over 20 years ago. It's a set of different stories, all kind of the same type of themes around exploring the Pacific Northwest and inspiring environmental stewardship long before it was the thing to talk about. And so one of these gifts is a welcoming to the Skagit Valley by Vi Herbert, who is a grandma from the Upper Skagit tribe. And she is the author of the Northern Litsusid Dictionary, and is the grandma who has passed one of our local languages on to everyone. One of the things that I have been exploring over this past year is this idea of, what is this message that we're trying to bring forth? And the thing that, the grandmas and the grandpas have inspired me with is this idea that tending is the message that we need, because tending is love in action. And one of the things that we need to do is put our lives into action. and not just talking about it and doing. Like, we need to become doers, not just, talkers. And so love in action is intending, is the one of the primary messages that come on that we do, and that's tending to ourselves, and from a spiritual standpoint, and from an emotional standpoint, and from a health standpoint, and from all the different standpoints of looking at ourselves and how do we tend to ourselves, which we do a horrible job of teaching in our society, in our cultures. Yeah, just ignore that, put it away, go away. To tending our family, to tending our community, and that if we can put this act of tending in place, then we do that. And then the most important thing is tending nature, which is what all of our indigenous cultures are built on, is this reciprocal relationship of tending, whether it be tending a plant or an animal or the area that you walk through, or giving it water, providing fire so that it has a beautiful ecosystem to flourish and to come in and to dig up the roots and the things, and you put them back in. And it's this constant process of life is tending. And so I really, as we're talking about what our new story is, I'm going to say that our new story is our old story. And our old story is a life built around tending. So I personally have figured out that my life mission is to become a tender in all of the things. And I've been doing this for a long time now, as Joe will express, is that, this is like the embodiment of who I am. And I've been working on, like, how do we build mutual aid? How do we, and this is something that I've been studying for over a decade now, and in all the different ways and all the different levels of government and all of the different weirdnesses. And I've been working on this. And this is one of the things that I want to bring forth as part of this process, is the collective body of work that I've been working on to share and to bring forth, because we are, as many people have said, it's past time. And so, Joe, I really need some time with you. And so I'm going to express this all the way out. So I would like to schedule time with you and Penny. I want to bring in some other people, and we need to really start, we got to get some money in funding, because, being a starving artist doesn't allow us to succeed in the things that we are setting forth in front of us to do right now. And it's an impediment, and we need to work on this. And I have some really beautiful ideas, and I would have some things to share. So anyway, thank you for everyone. I don't want to be spending all this time, and I very much bless each and every one of you. I really appreciate you guys and all the work that you're doing, and have a beautiful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. I just wanted to express, first of all, I have known Frank for a long time, and he is definitely tenderhearted in the most positive sense of what he was just saying. And I want to just emphasize the same point in a slightly different way, which is that notice how the narrative strategy is about action and is about love expressed through action. It's not about talking about stories, it's about doing them and living them and then sharing them as they're happening, which is exactly what Frank was describing with tending. And so I think that's very astute and very aligned. And Frank, we can find a time to meet, so we'll look for that. I want to close today, because we're at our time, by saying that I'll be making this recording available. It can be shared publicly. We can invite anyone and everyone into this story with us, this story strategy, this narrative strategy with us. And I feel like the more that we do this, the more that we will embody and understand how we do this. So like Penny said, I want to invite you to ask questions like Megan started to do. How am I going to tell my stories? I like to tell stories. Like Frank is like, I'm living one of these stories. Let me share one with you. So let's start from yesterday. Let's tell these stories. Some of you have been telling stories for a long time. But what's different now, as Robert was saying, is that the breakdown is actually far enough along that the cracks are coming through. And that now is the time to live out this different way of storying. And if, like I said at the beginning, if USAID is shut down and hundreds of thousands of organizations are looking for funding, and in that moment, we could basically paralyze our philanthropic infrastructure, what if instead we get more philanthropic organizations to see the value of flow funding, to use trust-based flows of small amounts of money into landscapes where the experts are the people doing it on the ground. And that by doing that, they actually create the virtuous circles of storytelling, story doing, storytelling, story doing. And that if we can do this well, we'll actually be living the geometry of living systems. We'll be living the geometry of regenerative economies. And that's how we'll grow them. And if we can share the stories into planetary frameworks, like Steve Melville was like, how do we do that? What are the elements of that? Let's keep asking that question so that we can tell those stories and live those stories in ways that manifest as reality the planetary frameworks. Because the one thing that's different from our indigenous ancestors is they never had a responsibility out of necessity to care for the planet as a whole. Meaning they were always operating at a localized, regionalized scale. And it's never been necessary to tend the planet as a whole until now. They were all tending their own little pieces of the whole. And that's what they did that was so beautiful and that we need to restore. But tending the whole is now a requirement for our species. And that adds the beauty of the part of this that is still new, that is new for us to do. And that it does require, as I've learned about preparing the eighth fire, going back to what Robert said about the prophecies, the preparing of the eighth fire in the Anishinaabe tradition is to go back and recover the stories from the past that we need to bring forward. We have to go back and gather the stories to know how to build the new. But then we build the new, we build the eighth fire with the stories. And the eighth fire, by the way, for those who don't know, is when we as collective humanity, oops, someone's trying to call me on WhatsApp. It's when we choose collectively the path of destruction and extinction of humanity or the path of life and caring for and being in service to life. That's what the eighth fire is about. And so we're doing that right now on this call, is we're gathering stories to put into the eighth fire, to ignite the eighth fire of humanity, which is humanity choosing to live in service to life at a planetary scale. And so let's do this. I'm excited to do it with all of you. Come play with us in many different places. You see where we are. We're pretty visible, and we're looking forward to doing it with you. So onward, fellow humans, and I'll see you out there in the storyscape.